"It's the strangest thing I've ever heard of," said Jinx. "When Everett went to bed last night, his toy train was on the floor, right by his window. But when he woke up this morning, it was gone. He and Mrs. Bean have looked all over the house. The train has vanished." It was a scorching day on the Bean farm. Jinx and Freddy were lying in the raspberry bushes, trying to get cool. Jinx had discovered that it helped to lie on his back with his legs straight up. Freddy was trying that too, but he was a lot bigger than Jinx, and he looked like a sweating boulder with 4 outstretched trotters. To distract himself from the heat, he'd been telling Jinx about a book he was reading, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. "I'd probably make a good detective." Freddy tended to think he was good at almost everything except the piano. Very few pigs master the piano. "Then why don't you become one and find Everett's train?" said Jinx. "Brilliant idea, my dear Jinx," said Freddy. "There are probably dozens of mysteries on this farm. I could solve them all and get that Walter Brooks fellow to write them up in a bestseller. Freddy the Detective. Everett's missing train could be my first case." "Oh, but only if you find it," said Jinx. "Oh, of course I'll find it," said Freddy, and sweated a little more. Everett was the adopted son of Mr. and Mrs. Bean. The Bean animals had rescued him from a life of misery in Canada, the story of which is told in Freddy Goes to the North Pole. Everett's bedroom was on the 2nd floor of the Bean farmhouse, and that was where he had kept his beloved metal train. Because that room was the scene of the crime, Freddy decided to go there and collect clues. "What exactly are clues?" asked Jinx. Freddy looked Sherlockian. "Clues are things you find." "What kind of things?" "You don't know until you find them," said Freddy. He began nosing about Everett's room, stopping every now and then to say in an important voice, "Aha!" or or "Very interesting." Freddy knew the more important you look, the faster you find clues. Plus, he was trying to impress Jinx. After a while, Jinx got so bored of all the ahas and the and asked Freddy, "So, how are the clues coming? Found any?" With one final aha, Freddy turned to him and said, "I have indeed. And furthermore, I can tell you who stole the train." Freddy led Jinx over to the open window and pointed out some flecks of green paint on the sill. "See that? Those green marks are the same color as the train. That proves the train was pulled over the sill and through the window. Last night when you were sleeping in the kitchen, did you hear any odd noises?" "Oh, just those 4 flies that sleep on the kitchen ceiling," said Jinx. "They got to fighting again in the middle of the night. And, oh yeah, there was a clatter outside, now that you mention it." "That was Everett's train falling to the garden from his window," said Freddy. "Now take a look at the pillow. See those little gray hairs? Whose are those?" "Well, Everett's?" asked Jinx doubtfully. "Everett has red hair, and those aren't cat hairs, too short, and they're too coarse for mice." An alarm went off in Jinx's head. "Rat hairs!" he cried. "But how did a rat get in here without me seeing?" Freddy pointed under the bed at the wall. "A fresh rat hole." Jinx's heart sank. His most important job on the farm was to keep the rats away. If Farmer Bean knew they were back in the house, he would be very disappointed. Freddy and Jinx went outside to the flower bed below Everett's window. Sure enough, there was an indentation in the garden, and the faint outline where something had been dragged across the lawn in the direction of the horse barn. Freddy and Jinx followed the trail into the barn, where Hank was having lunch. "Have you heard any peculiar noises at night, Hank?" asked Freddy. Hank munched thoughtfully. "Well, I reckon I have. Some rustlings and squeaking under the floor. Reminds me of the sounds the rats used to make. But I don't know how it can be Simon and his family, because we chased them out of here 2 years ago." "Oh, this is bad," said Freddy. "Those rats have a whole maze of rooms and tunnels burrowed under the barn, and we had a heck of a time evicting them. Simon promised they'd never return. We'd better find out what they're up to." Eenie, one of the braver mice, was sent down a tunnel with a white flag of truce, and pretty soon he came back up with old Simon. "Hello, Jinx," said Simon. "You and the pig are looking a little worried. Something on your mind?" "I want to know what you're doing back in the barn," said Jinx. "It's our old family mansion. Why shouldn't we be here?" replied Simon. "You agreed to leave." "We didn't agree to anything. You forced us to go, and we believe that every animal has the right to live where he wants. All of you animals have big, comfortable houses here. Why should we rats live in exile up in the big, drafty woods?" "Because you're thieves," cried Jinx. "You stole Mr. Bean's grain." "And Everett's toy train," added Freddy. "Very clever of you to figure that out, pig," said Simon. Well, get ready, 'cause you and your stuck-up friends are in for a surprise." And with that, Simon turned and scrabbled back down his rat hole. Freddy and Jinx walked back across the barnyard. "I'm very worried," said Freddy. "We better watch the barn tonight. I can smell trouble in the air." Oh, if only Freddy knew. The thunder rumbled distantly that evening, and the orchard trees stood out black against the flickering sky. Freddy and Jinx stole back into the barn. As the storm came nearer, Freddy heard the thump-thump of windows being closed up at the farmhouse. The wind picked up, and then with a rattle and a roar, the rain came down with a vengeance. Freddy and Jinx took advantage of the noise to creep upstairs to the hayloft. They guessed the rats were mostly interested in the big feed box there, brimming as it was with wholesome grain. Just as they reached the top of the stairs, the rain suddenly stopped. Everything went dead quiet. Freddy and Jinx could hear an odd rattling sound, and then Freddy saw something that made his tail uncurl in terror. A flicker of lightning lit up what appeared to be a long, low snake, moving across the floor in the direction of the feed box. Then there was another flash of lightning, and Freddy saw what the strange animal was. Everett's train. Freddy couldn't figure out for the life of him how that train could move on its own, but Jinx had a good idea. The fearless cat pounced on the moving train, but couldn't turn over the cars. Freddy could hear the sound of laughter from inside the cars, and the voices of rats jeering, "Smarty cat, Jinx, he can't catch us now." Jinx kept leaping at the cars, but he wasn't strong enough to knock them over. The train moved hungrily on to the feed box. "The rats are inside the cars, using it for protection," Jinx cried out in frustration. "They're like turtles in a shell. I can't get them out." "But I can," said Freddy stoutly. He charged across the floor. He could see the rats' feet moving inside the cars as they pushed it forward. Freddy knocked over the train and tried to pull the rats out with his teeth, but in the process he bit into the metal car and broke a tooth, and then one of the rats leapt up and nipped him in the ear. Freddy and Jinx had no choice but to retreat downstairs in total defeat. Simon and the rats had won the battle of the feed box. Mr. Bean's grain was at the rats' mercy, waiting to be stolen and dragged back in the train, to be hidden away in their warren holes beneath the barn. It was a grim time for Freddy. He had no idea how to rid the rats from the barn, or to stop their great train robbery. He knew that a detective like Sherlock Holmes would come up with a solution, so why couldn't he? He also had to endure the mockery of the rats as they traveled back and forth to the feed box in their train. They sang as they went, "Freddy the sleuth, he busted a tooth. He's a silly old bonehead, and that's the truth." There were dozens more verses, none of them very flattering to Freddy. Jinx had as much to lose as Freddy. His reputation as the enforcer of law and order on the Bean farm was in tatters. Simon and his gang were rapidly eating their way through Mr. Bean's stockpile of grain. "We can beat them in a battle," said Jinx, "but only if we have all the animals with us and we're out in the open. But they're safe in the barn with all their holes, and even if we do catch 'em, what do we do then? They'll only escape." Freddy got an idea. Usually he got them when he was lying down with his eyes wide shut, but this one came to him at the same time as he was awake. "We need a jail," he said, "just like the one in Centerboro, and we'll hire a judge who decides who goes to jail and how long they stay there." "Where will the jail be?" asked Jinx. "The box stall beside Hank would be perfect, and we can have guards." A meeting of the animals was called to discuss the idea. Everyone agreed that the box stall made a perfect prison. But when it came to choosing a judge, there was disagreement among the animals. The more sensible ones, such as Freddy, Jinx, and the 3 cows, Mrs. Wogus, Wurzburger, and Wiggins, favored Peter the bear, who was widely respected for his probing intelligence. But Charles the rooster leapt up at the meeting, crowing cockily about his experience in mediating the constant disputes in the henhouse. Charles also pointed out that Peter the bear was sound asleep from December to March. Jinx, a vocal supporter of Peter, said that a good judge asleep was better than a bad judge awake, especially one who looked like a feather duster. Charles danced with rage at the insult, but, in the end, he was elected judge. Jinx, who was a sore loser, ambushed Charles after the meeting with a bunch of rotten tomatoes, tarnishing the rooster's handsome tail feathers. Charles angrily blurted out that he would get even with Jinx. That is not a good thing for anyone to say, especially a judge. With the judge and jail in place, all that remained was the capture of Simon and the rats. There was going to be a battle. Like many cows, Mrs. Wiggins suffered from low self-esteem. "You know thinking isn't my strong point," she told Freddy. "I've got brains, but they aren't the kind of brains that think. Take ideas, for example. I can't remember when I had my last one." Freddy had been puzzling how to get the train out of the loft and out into the open where the rats could be dealt with. He asked for her advice. "Oh, bottom line, you're asking the wrong cow, Freddy," she said. "But land's sakes, there must be some way of getting the train. Why not just tie a rope on it, and I could pull it out?" "My dear Mrs. Wiggins," said Freddy, "that is an idea." "Oh, nonsense," said Mrs. Wiggins. "It's not an idea, it's something I thought of." Freddy remembered there was a door in the loft through which Mr. Bean lifted the hay every summer. Over the door was a pulley with a strong rope ending in an iron hook. Freddy took Mrs. Wiggins' idea and added a plan. That night, he and Jinx stole back up to the loft and watched as the trains, with the rats in it, ran back and forth, storing up grain. "Here's an old curly tail," cried the bold thieves when they spotted Freddy. "Who you gonna arrest tonight, Mr. Broken Tooth?" And then they sang, "Oh, we are the brave young rats who laugh at the barnyard prigs. We can lick our weight in cats and double our weight in pigs." Suddenly Freddy said, "Let's go!" And before the rats knew what was happening, Freddy had fastened the iron hook to the window of the train engine. He hollered down to Mrs. Wiggins, who, with the other end of the rope looped around one horn, simply walked away from the barn, pulling the train forward faster and faster. There was a great rattling and squeaking as the train was dragged across the floor and then yanked up to the pulley. The rats fell out of it like peas from a pod. Jinx rushed amongst them, boxing their ears, and he was able to grab Simon's son Ezra by the back of the neck and hold him while the other rats made their escape. Jinx told Ezra he was under arrest, and Freddy read him his rights. Then Freddy, Mrs. Wiggins, and Jinx, who was still hanging on to Ezra, went over to the henhouse and woke up Judge Charles. "Time to do some judging, you old bag of feathers," cried Jinx. Charles, who was still mad at Jinx, glared at the cat, but turned to the rat and said in his most judgy voice, "Ezra, I hereby sentence you to 3 months in jail, no parole, no chance for an appeal. Now I'm going back to bed." After Ezra was locked up in the box stall, the animals dragged the train up to the farmhouse steps, where Everett would see it first thing in the morning. Growing up in rural Canada, he had never had much in the way of toys. He was going to be thrilled to get his beloved train back again. Freddy turned to Mrs. Wiggins. "Everett owes his train to you," he said. "You're a first-class detective. You might be too big to hide behind trees and shadow suspects, but you have something far more important. Ideas." "Oh, land of Goshen," said Mrs. Wiggins, blushing at the praise. "It was just common sense." "Well, that's exactly what the best ideas are made of," said Freddy. "And here's my best, most sensible idea. I want you to come into partnership with me. We'll form the world's first animal detective agency." Mrs. Wiggins was overwhelmed, and a large cow tear of happiness splashed onto the farmhouse steps. Neither of Freddy nor Mrs. Wiggins knew how famous they would become as sleuths, nor could they imagine the terrible accusations that would soon be launched against their brave friend Jinx. You'll have to watch Freddy the Detective Part 2, The Trial, to learn about that. But in the meantime, if you have time, could you help Freddy and Mrs. Wiggins nail up their advertisements around Centerboro? This is what the signs read. "Frederick and Wiggins, detectives. Plain and fancy shadowing. Stolen articles restored. Criminals captured. Missing animals found. Not a loss to a client in less than a century. Common sense, good ideas, and proven results." Oh, and by the way, every summer Frederick and Wiggins hires students to help with clue gathering and other light detective tasks. If you live near Centerboro, you might think of applying. The end.